horizon and your understanding, and seeing that health reform is not just some dead formalism, that it actually is part of our doctrine, that it actually does matter. And I think, we've already been building a case, talk by talk, about how important health reform is, that there is a salvational message in it, and we get that right from the Garden of Eden, where God says, eat this and don't eat that. If you eat this, you belong to me, and if you eat that, you don't belong to me. And he's done that throughout history, from Genesis to Revelation, from the beginning of time until the end of time. So we are going to be looking at how the health message is part of our doctrinal foundation, and how it really is it's a process and a progress as God has moved us out of the dark ages. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is I will be talking about the health message as a does anybody want to sit up front so you can see these? Come on up if you want to. There's plenty of room here. And if you don't care, then I won't even bring it up here. You guys care? You guys even want to see it? So if you can't see it and you do want to see it, come on up. So we're going to talk about why is the health message important to you or me, and his promises of health and healing, and why how the health message rises out of the dark ages, bringing truth out of darkness. We're going to talk about the physical, then the spiritual principles, and then we're going to talk about what does health reform have to do with me? Why is health reform important in the last days? And then your challenge and my challenge. So when we actually kind of have to do what we got to do here, because we don't have any power. So I would like to start by asking, what is it that you are willing to give up for Jesus? Are you willing to give up some strongly held beliefs that maybe aren't true? Are you willing to give up self? Are you willing to lay your pride and your ego down? Are you willing to get rid of the world and whatever that means? Like if you have a fire in your house and you literally lose everything that you own, are you still going to be praising God and thanking him? Somehow this had something to do with perfecting my character. Because remember, everything that we go through is a test. Are we going to continue to move on in our Christian character perfection, or are we going to get angry at God and why did you do this to me? He wants to get us to a point where literally, if we lose everything, we are still praising him. And we still honor him. We still trust him. We still love him. We still know that somehow we know that good comes out of all things for those who love and trust God. It's really learning to trust him in a whole new way. And are we willing to give up our favorite foods? And are we willing to give up attitudes? Are we willing to give up impatience? Are we willing to have others before us? Are we willing to get out of our comfort zone in order to save other people, in order to care about the salvation of the world? What are we willing to do? And I really ask that because it's a hard question that we each have to ask ourselves, and we have to examine ourselves very closely. What am I willing to go through or not go through? What am I willing to get or not get? What am I willing to give up or not give up? What favorite food am I willing to give up or not give up? You see, God is calling us to get rid of self completely get rid of self. That I don't care what inconvenience I have to go through. I don't care what food I have to eat, even if I don't like it for the first month. I will do what he asks me to do. And that is my walk by faith. And then we see that there are many spiritual voices that are out there proclaiming the Genesis 1:29 diet. We see in Genesis 3:18 where vegetables are added, and then 2:16 and 17 where God commanded our diet. But we ask, what if we believe that there's a salvational message in the health message, why don't we follow it? Why aren't we following everything that we know? Why aren't we moving and searching with all of our heart about this message? And what are my requirements? It's not me trying to work my way to heaven and eat my way to heaven. I've said that many times. This is truly righteousness by faith. And this is eating because it's eating the way that I do because I'm saved, because I call myself a Christian. It's not in order to be saved like the Pharisees and Sadducees. It's just like the Sabbath, same thing. I'm not keeping the Sabbath in order to be saved. I keep it because I love the Lord and because he tells us that is his holy day. And so once we really start to understand these issues, we can really start to examine ourselves, that when we sing that world that Jesus is all the world to us, is he really all of the world to us? I mean, really, is he really all the world to you and to me? I examine my life, you examine your life, because this is where the rubber meets the road. We have to make decisions. We find that truth is not in opinions. It's not my opinion versus your opinion. So if it's not your opinion versus my opinion, and we both love the Lord, but yet we believe two different things, then why can't we lay our pride and our ego down in the dirt, that it doesn't matter what we believe, let's just find truth. Because I don't own truth. You don't own truth. The truth is in the Bible, and there's only one truth. People don't die and then immediately go to heaven, or they go to purgatory, or they sleep. It's not one of those three truths. There's only one truth in the Bible. So what does happen when we die? And we dig until we find it. Who cares what our own personal opinion is? Just lay our pride and our ego in the dirt. It doesn't matter, because this is not my truth. And that's what happened in the days of the reformers, the Reformation. They were finding all of these truths, and then we see in the 1850s and 40s, we see we're going to be talking about the progression of truth. Because we are told in Philippians 3:17, we are told that we have made our belly our God, and those who have made their belly their God, which is the far majority of the people of the world. And we can even get that principle from the time of the flood. There was only 8 people who did not make their belly their God out of the entire world. That's not very many people. So that requires a major examination in my life for me, and in your life for you. Only 8 people followed God and did not make their bellies their God. And then in Hosea 4:6, we are told that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. We see that the health reform message is a message of our spirituality. It shows where we are spiritually. Now, God will have all of his people, his true people, whether they're Adventists or not, they will have some kind of understanding of their body as the temple of God. Now, they may not be full health reformers, and they don't have to be, because God's already working with them on something else. But just like right now today, people aren't lost just because they're not keeping the Sabbath, because there's still many people who just don't know. And God knows if they don't know, and if they did or didn't have an opportunity to actually know that truth. And it's the same with the health message. There's no difference. So we see that there are so many people out there in the world that are teaching this message. They're secular people, and they may be people of other faiths and no faith and New Agers and all sorts of people. but yet God has not called us to be a vegetarian. God has not called us to be a vegan. God has not called us to be whole food, plant-based. God has called us to be health reformers. And that's quite different from, it includes all of those other ones and the voices of the world, but that's not the end point. But too many of our people treat what they say as the end point. And once we've gotten rid of all animal products, we think we're health reformers, but we're actually not, because we think we've arrived without understanding that the health message is actually progressive. It's from now until the end of time, and it does not end just because I gave up animal products. There is all sorts of other principles that God wants to teach us as well, and that's what we have been learning this week. So if we think that diet is salvational, I'd like to ask the question, then why don't we follow it? And it is because I would like to say three things. One is because we just want to eat what we want to eat. We're the Church of Laodicea. And once we recognize our position, now we can actually do something about it. If we don't recognize where we are, then we're just going to stay stuck where we've been. But once we recognize it, then it's like, oh, okay, that's actually me. That refers to me personally. Not to finger point at everybody else, because we each have to look at our own lives and examine ourselves, but we just kind of want to eat what we want to eat. We don't want to be conformed based upon what God has said. He says that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. But we would just become stuck in what we want to eat, because maybe this is the way we've been raised. Maybe this is what I like to taste. This is what I'm used to. I don't know how to cook anything else. And we don't make that effort to continue to move on. Number two is that in Philippians 3:18, that we have made our God, our belly, our God, and we have made a God out of our taste buds. We see that also, that some of us just plain don't understand. We just don't know what the health message is. Maybe we've been busy looking at other things in the Bible, and God's been working with us on other character issues. And so this just hasn't been a topic that we've come across yet. And I'm talking about our people worldwide. I'm not talking any person here, but I'm just giving, examples of things that I understand. And then in Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. But yet we're told that the truth will set us free. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And we are to be doers of the word. And James says, show me your faith without your works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. And so we have to be a people who actually do, and we have to be a people of faith where we are actually following what he says, because we are saved. God gives us a promise in Exodus 15:26. And it says, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, then, you see all the ifs, if you do this, if you do that, then I will do this. See, this is a conjunction that shows us that the statement either all has to be true or it will be all false. And he says, if you do this, then I will do that. But if you don't do this, I won't do that. So we see that he will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that heals thee. So if we diligently hearken, and it says diligently, not haphazardly, not once I become baptized and I've learned all the 28 fundamental beliefs, and now there's nothing more to learn and I've kind of arrived. That's not diligently. Yes, diligently maybe for a time, but that's the beginning of our walk, and too many of us think that's the end of our walk. All right, I know all the truths now, and now I can just kind of glide through life. But that's not the way it is at all. And then in Exodus 23:25, if you serve the Lord your God, he shall bless thy bread and thy water, and I will take away sickness from the midst of thee. So in Exodus 15:26, he is saying about if you diligently obey me, then I will prevent diseases from coming upon you. In Exodus 23, he says, if you diligently search me, then I will take diseases away. I will reverse your diseases. So we're talking about disease prevention and disease reversal. And God has actually given us the health message to be a holy people. And this is our walk before him. In Jeremiah 30:17, he now says again, I will restore health to you and heal your wounds. So again, he's telling us a promise that he will reverse these diseases upon us. In Deuteronomy 7:14 and 15, that God wants to bless us above all people, and the Lord will take away from us all our sickness. And then in Romans 12:1 and 2, I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, not a dying sacrifice, a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but yet be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So he is saying, you obey me, and I will reverse and prevent diseases from coming upon you. I don't know about you, but I find that as pretty promising. And we're also told then in Christian Temperance Bible Hygiene in 19.2, it says, who will enter in through the gates into the city? Not those who declare that they cannot break the force of appetite. And there we go, right back to the principles of the Garden of Eden, where God says, I command your diet, I command this food to be made, I've created it, and then I'm telling you what your diet is, and then I'm commanding your diet. It's a progression right there in Genesis 1 through 3, and then we are warned about the wily foe in 3:1, about how subtle Satan is, and then we read about the fall, and then we get the vegetables right after sin. So we see this progression, and so it, and these principles that we read from the Spirit of Prophecy, we don't have to wonder if the health message is part of the Bible or not. It's actually there. She just kind of rewords things that are already in the Bible and kind of makes it a little more understandable and much more clear, and brings a lot more punch to many of us. So who will enter into the gates into the city? Not those who declare that they cannot break the force of appetite. Same thing, Adam and Eve. God says, eat of these trees and you belong to me. And if you eat of that tree, you don't, and you will surely die. And then we're told that in 3:1 that Satan is very subtle. So, and then we read in 1 Corinthians 3:17 and 6:20, where we are the temple of God. And if we destroy the temple of God, then God will destroy us. So if we don't want to be destroyed, this is not fear-mongering. This is God showing us the way of salvation. Are we going to look at this as a negative? Like God, like this is fear and fear and brimstone, where it's actually not. This is God continuing to try to draw us. He's telling us the way of salvation. This is the red carpet that he wants his people to be on. And then he says in Ministry of Healing 146.1 that the people need to see the bearing of health principles upon their well-being for this life and the life to come. To me, that's red light, red flashing lights, the life to come. We're talking about the 144,000. We're talking about end time prophetic events. We're talking about the new heaven and earth. So, I read this language, and my red lights go off, and I'm just like taking a real good hard look at myself. The health message is what gives God a fighting chance to save you and me. It is a way for God to shine his light, his Shekinah glory through this body temple, that we may shine it upon a hilltop, that it not may only save us, but many, many others as well. And of course, we know that we cannot be saved without caring about the salvation of other people. So we have to care about that as well. This is we look at Daniel. He did not have this outward display of his diet because he wanted everyone to look at himself. No, it's the same thing for us. He was humble, he was meek, his ego was laid down. We went through the character differences between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar and how opposite they were. And we look at their diet, and then we see that Nebuchadnezzar has the exact opposite character from Daniel until he finally starts to eat like Daniel after 7 years and he's fully detoxed. And now he sees the God of heaven. You see, he wasn't eating like that in order to be saved. I mean, God was bringing him to eat like that to be saved, but eventually that diet brought him around to understand. You see how God is trying to bring us around through health reform to be a holy people. And just like Nebuchadnezzar and just like Daniel, these are the principles that we learn. Our diet is that outward expression of how we feel about God. It's the same thing as the Sabbath, that going to church on the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath holy and keeping the corners careful from sundown to sundown and not doing our own things. That's another outward expression of our love for God. We're not trying to be saved, by keeping the Sabbath. It's just our love for him. We see that Christ began the work of redemption. This is CTBH, Christian Temperance Bible Hygiene, 16.1, that Christ began the work of redemption just where the ruin began. So I'm bringing this history because I want us to understand that this is a progressive message throughout the whole Bible. And I'm going to bring it to more modern times so you can see that this is from Genesis to Revelation, that the health reform message has never changed. The specifics may have changed, but the principles have never changed. And the principles have always been obedience. So there was a time when clean and unclean were okay, but then there was a time it wasn't anymore. When God was trying to lead his people out of Egypt with the manna, so we see him bringing his people back. So I go through all of this history for a reason, and I'm taking it in chunks with every talk that I give. So now when we come up to today, now the whole big picture kind of comes into play. So Christ began the work of redemption just where the ruin began. And his victory is an assurance that we too may come off victors in our conflicts with the enemy. Jesus overcame in the same way that we overcome. He was giving nothing more than how we can overcome as well. He was not given anything extra. So, but it is not our Heavenly Father's purpose to save us without an effort on our part to cooperate with Christ. We must act our part, and divine power uniting with our effort will bring victory. You see, it's never just me, and it's never just God. It's hand in hand, humanity and divinity working together. And that's what the whole book of James is about. It's about how our works and our faith must go together. We cannot separate them and expect to still be saved. The Pharisees and the Sadducees alone tell us that we can't have works alone. And then we can't have faith alone because there's many requirements that are in the Bible that tell us that these are God's way. And then we're also told in Temperance 13.2, Satan is constantly on the alert to bring the race fully under his control. His strongest hold on man is through appetite. And this he seeks to stimulate in every possible way. And so when we're eating all this stimulating food, the spices, the meat, the dairy, the processed foods, the sugar, the floury products, and all these processed foods that don't actually come from the hand of the Lord, they're very stimulating. So it's to our advantage to actually study this out and to be like the Bereans, that when we hear people talk about different things, are we going to, like some people say coffee is okay and some people say it's not okay. Well, are we going to go home and be like the Bereans? Are we going to study, well, which way is true? Because, see, a true Christian lays pride and ego and opinion down. I don't care what the truth is. I just want the truth. Just tell me what the truth is. Because it's not about ego. It's not my truth. I want God's truth. And so when we hear conflicting things, it's okay to eat this and it's okay to eat that, or don't eat this, and other people say it's okay to eat that, are we going to be like the Bereans and actually check it out and actually study it out and then reason it out? We're told, again, who will enter into the cities, into the gates? Not those who declare that they cannot break the force of appetite. We cannot obtain that victory alone. So there is we are told in, as you know, this is a medical missionary course here, and we are told then to understand more about natural remedies. And that actually comes from the Bible as well. We are, and this is really important to understand because this is where health reform or natural remedies come in place. So why do we have the health message when Jesus can, just like when he walked on earth, he says, be healed? See, God obviously can still do that today. He still can, and there are occasions he still does. But in the most part, he's not using that way anymore. He's using health reform in order to heal people. So we read in MM 14, the way in which Christ worked was to preach the word and to relieve suffering by miraculous works of healing. But I am instructed that we cannot now work in this way, for Satan will exercise his power by working miracles. God's servants today could not work by means of miracles because spurious works of healing, claiming to be divine, will be wrought. Okay? So for this reason, the Lord has marked out a way in which his people are to carry forward a work of physical healing combined with the teaching of the word. Sanitariums are to be established, and with these institutions are to be connected workers who will carry forward genuine medical missionary work. So yes, he can still work the miracles, but he won't, because Satan mimics those miracles. And if we've been paying attention for the last 20 plus years, we see that that is very true. You go onto television and you see these televangelists, and they've got millions of followers, and they're in this big stage where there's just tens of thousands of people, like as if they're in a big concert. And and you see people in wheelchairs, people that are blind and deaf and have chronic disease that they can't get rid of, and they're all up on the stage, and the pastor comes by and bops them on the head with the palm of his hand, and they fall down and they start wiggling, and there's usually a couple of big men behind these people, and they fall down and they get caught and they're carefully brought to the ground, and they do whatever they're going to do on the ground, and then a couple of minutes later they get up and they're healed, and they're no longer deaf or blind or in a wheelchair or with this chronic disease or whatever the issue is. And even though there's tens of thousands of people, that pastor has the audacity to get up there and say, I feel that there's someone in this room, and there's tens of thousands of people. Somebody here has a broken limb, and I feel you're going to be healed. And somebody's dealing with a chronic disease, that'd be like 70% of the people, and you're going to be healed. And they're supposedly healed. The thing that I like about research is that there's people that actually go back and follow these people, and they have found that none of them have been true. So, but yet the world believes that they're true. But the researchers who wanted to actually see if it was true found it wasn't true. So, that this is Satan at work. We're told that they're in Healthful Living 225.3, and it's also in TC 5 in 443. There are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there's only one way that heaven approves. God's remedies. Remember, God's calling diet a remedy. And many times we want to take something in order to get over our issue. So it's not just as medical missionaries we need to know what natural remedies are. What we need to know first is what the true health reform diet looks like. Not according to my opinion or where I am in my life and understanding, but what does the end point look like? And where do I need to go? Where do I need to take my people? And God's way is high fruit. And if we're not doing high fruit, then we're not doing it fully God's way. We might be on the path, and this might be a new principle for you, and you might be on the red carpet, but that's where we need to start moving our patients to. It's not just getting people off of animal products. So, and I showed you on the screen what the food guide pyramid looks like according to God. So God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. Pure air and water are called remedies. Cleanliness. So our body cleanliness, taking baths, making sure that a couple of times a week or more that we are actually cleaning our bodies. And a proper diet is called a remedy. Showering is called a remedy. And purity of life is a remedy. And firm trust in God is a remedy. And it's these remedies that are for the want of thousands, yet that are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that the people do not appreciate. I know when I do fomentations on somebody, it takes, 45 minutes from start to end, or maybe an hour, because you got to gather all your supplies, and you got to fill the big bucket, and you got to bring it to boiling, and then you put your fomentations in, and you got to get your gloves, and you got to find your timer, and it takes time. And then you're doing your hot and your cold and your hot and your cold, and this all takes time, and people don't really appreciate that too much anymore, and including many of us, we think it's too time consuming. So instead of doing hydrotherapy on people, and I am a certified hydrotherapist, instead of doing hydrotherapy on people, we want to give them something. We want to give them herbs. Sometimes the best thing that we can do is do nothing. And fasting is a very powerful remedy. You don't do anything. You don't give them herbs. You don't give them anything. You might do fomentations, but then when they start, after a day or two of fasting, then you might want to do a couple of days of fruit fasting and a couple of days of juice fasting. And, this isn't, we sometimes make it very, very difficult. We think that we have to know 1,000 remedies for everything, when these are actually God's remedies right here. That if we just know how to feed people in God's full, true health reform way, high fruit, and everything natural, everything that can be picked from a tree or from a garden, which is only fruits, vegetables, and lots of high raw, nuts and seeds, grains, beans. These are God's, this is his true diet. And where many of us just think, well, I've given up animal products, that's all I need to do. That's just the beginning of the health reform. So fresh air, exercise, pure water, and clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all, but with little expense. And yet, so many times the sick, all they need is a nice, comfortable chair outside in the shade, so they're not getting burned, and they just need to sit outside and read a book for a couple of days. And that's just the greatest remedy that anyone can offer. So I want to show you something here, and that is now how the health reform rises out of the Dark Ages. So bringing truth out of darkness. So if anybody can't see it, feel free to move forward. But okay, so you know in the Dark Ages that this was a time of moral and spiritual darkness, the darkest part of our history, and that's why it's called the Dark Ages. Nobody knew really what the Bible said. You know, some of the higher ups in the Catholic Church knew, but they weren't teaching the full truth, or many of them were actually just, it was hearsay. I'm just hearing what everybody is saying, and this is what the other priests say, so it must be true. So when God finally decides that we are in the greatest moral depravity that we've ever been in, and superstition, that he's like, okay, it's time now to bring my truth back into existence again. And we know from great controversy, that's where most of this comes from. It comes from great controversy, but we don't really think about it in these terms. And so we see that that God set the Waldensians as the keepers of the faith. They were the keepers of the faith, and God brought to their understanding them that they were to believe the Bible only. So they were the keepers of the faith, the protectors of the truth, and they originated in France. And this group departed from the Roman Catholic Church teaching, and they were considered to be the early forerunners of our time. And so their job with this truth of we were to believe the Bible only, they were to now the keepers of the faith. This was present truth, and they were to evangelize the world with this truth, with just what they knew. They didn't know all the other truths yet. This is all they knew. They knew nothing else about the Bible except this truth. Now, when this movement has an opportunity to go worldwide, and then people started to accept it on a greater scale, eventually it started to become corrupted. So God now brought out the second group, and he brought out John Wyclif, where John now understood that the emphasis was upon the scriptures as the only law of the church. Now, the Waldensians were no longer the keepers of the faith. God now ordained that John Wyclif and his group now were the keepers of the faith, and the believing the Bible only, that was already a truth that swept the world, so that now became a precious truth. The present truth now became, the emphasis was upon the scripture as the only law for the church. And then when that opportunity came around and the world was evangelized through these keepers of the faith and keepers of the Bible, now they started to become corrupt, and God now brought out another truth. And so he raised up now John Huss, and you can see the years here from 1369 to 1415. And Huss started to understand that obedience was only to God. The emphasis upon the scriptures as the only law of the church and believing in the Bible only, those now took a back seat as precious truths, and now we have a present truth. So every time that God brings out a new truth, it becomes a present truth. And then the other ones now take kind of a step back, and they become now precious truths. So this is also answering the questions, why do we have so many denominations? We can look at this process and see how we answer that question. And it comes right out of the Dark Ages. So eventually, these keepers of the faith, the Hussites, then they were to evangelize the world. They were the keepers of the faith. Eventually, they became corrupt. And then now God raised up Martin Luther, 1483 to 1546, where God brought him to understand that salvation is only by grace. And so from now, we see that they are now the keepers of the faith, and that the other truths become precious truths. This is now a present truth. Eventually, as time went by, they were able to evangelize the world. They became corrupt. This is a constant pattern again and again and again. God rises up a truth, and we are no different as Seventh-day Adventists, and you're going to see that God rises up a truth, the church becomes very pure and holy, and now they are the keepers of the faith, and eventually, over years and years and years, they become corrupt. And we're showing the progressiveness because we have to understand where we have come from as well as a movement. Then we see that God raised up John Calvin, and God helped him to understand that we must keep growing as Christians, and this is where the Calvinists and the Presbyterians come in play. And so now they become the keepers of the faith. They're to evangelize the world with this new present truth. Eventually, after years and years, they become corrupt. And now God raises up the Anabaptists, where baptism is by immersion only and not by sprinkling. And so that they became the keepers of the faith with present truth. Eventually, they became corrupt. And we see that John Wesley was then raised up from 1703 to 1791. The church is called the holiness, and that we are to experience Christ personally, and this is where the Methodists come in play. So you see, you're kind of seeing the progression of all these Christian movements and why they believe different things, because the people who did not continue on with the present truth remained then back in darkness. They were no longer in present truth. And eventually, if they continued to corrupt this present truth, that's when God had to raise up somebody else. Let's start out fresh again, because every single one of these movements is God saying we need to start fresh again because my word has become corrupt again. And then he raises up William Miller in 1833, and that he understood about the second coming of Christ, and that's where the Millerite movement comes from. This group now becomes the keepers of the faith. Their job is to evangelize the world with this present truth. All the other ones take a back seat with precious truth, and then eventually out of William Miller then becomes the Advent movement. And during the Advent movement in 1863, which that was the formulation of it, but this is where God now brought clarity of many of the other truths in the Bible about the state of the dead, the eternal hellfire, and that God isn't burning people forever and ever and ever after they die, that there is no immortality of the soul, talking more understanding the second resurrection and the first and second resurrection, and the Sabbath and Sunday issue and the health message. These now all become present truth. All of the other ones are precious truth. This group of people, the Advent people, now become keepers of the faith. Their job is to evangelize the world. Eventually, after years and years and years, they become corrupt, and now we see that where we are today. We are told to not leave the ship, though, so don't leave the ship, but because there is no more coming out. So this is the final movement, but out of this movement is where the 144,000 will come from. It's because we understand all of the 27, 28 fundamental beliefs, including diet, everything dealing with diet. Diet must be perfect, just like our faith must be perfect, just like we keep the Sabbath perfect, and we use the word perfect in God's definition, not mine. And that definition is of perfect faith. It's not I'm perfect. It's how am I relating my relationship to God? So let's break this down now. And Michael, I believe, talked to you a couple of days ago on the Advent movement with the health reform, but I'm going to just highlight a little bit more of it. All right, so we see that God has three priorities as he is trying to raise up this movement of the Advent movement. we see that the first priority happened in the 1840s. And in the 1840s was the formulation of the doctrinal framework. All the doctrines that we know of today are becoming formulated. So we can't take, when those things are just being formulated, we have some people among us, I'm not talking about this group here, but among our movement worldwide, we have some who believe that back in the back in the 1840s, that things that were taught back then were part of our doctrine, yet not everything was actually formulated yet. So people are taking some supposed truths from long ago, but if we see post 1863, we see that some of those things are not being taught anymore. So we have to look at the progression from the 40s to the 50s to the 60s and beyond. So God's first priority, formulation of our doctrinal framework. God really brought into the understanding of the Sabbath, that it's actually from Friday night sundown until Saturday night sundown, that it does matter what day we go to church, and that there is a health message in the Bible. In the 1840s, part of that framework was God showing us that there is a health message in the Bible. But that health message was given in 1848, and that first message was that tobacco, tea, and coffee were poisons, and that they actually poison heaven, and that we are not to poison our body temple with these things, and how disgusting they are in the sight of heaven. Can you imagine somebody up in heaven smoking and putrefying the air? You know, that pure, fresh, heavenly air, and then someone smoking. It just doesn't fit, you know, with God's health message. So that was the first vision. You can imagine there were a lot of people, of God's people, who were drinking tea and coffee and smoking, and they rebelled against this health message. And so that happened in 1848. Eventually, then, God brought out the second priority in the 1850s, which was to organize then the denomination. And then God brought about a second health vision on February 12th of 1854, showing that adultery is wrong and that God's people are not to be committing adultery, that our body needs to be clean, and that showering is actually a health principle, and that we need to control our appetite. We are not to use profanity, and God was telling us that we were neglecting our children and not raising them in God's standards. So that was priority number 2 in the 1850s. Now, if we look at the 1860s, God is now organizing the church structure. And in May 13th of 1860, that was when the first legally organized Seventh-day Adventist church was formed in Parkville, Michigan. And then in October 1st of 1860 was when the Seventh-day Adventist name was officially adopted. And then also on that same date, when our name was adopted, that was when the very first publishing house was organized, same day. And then on May 21st of 1863, just a few years later, the General Conference was organized. So for the 40s, formulation of the doctrinal framework. The 50s was organization of the denomination, to organize the denomination itself, and then to organize the church structure. And then we also see part of that third structure was a third vision on health. And that third vision was more of a comprehensive topic, where God now adds that our health is a religious duty, that disease is caused by a violation of health, that spicy foods are forbidden, tobacco is forbidden, and including stimulants and alcohol. We are not to overwork ourselves. We are not to have intemperate sexual relations, even between husband and wife. Vegetarianism was advocated. Pork and unclean foods were prohibited. We were told of the dangers of overeating and eating between meals. And we are told the benefits of natural remedies and water fasting and pure air and water, sunshine, exercise, rest, nutrition. And then 22 years later, she adds trust in God as a remedy. And then we see that the number 4, the fourth health vision, was that that we are to emphasize opening up health centers and health institutions to cure those who are ill and in preventative health as well. So when we look at just like how the health reform came out of the Dark Ages, I mean, we're not in the Dark Ages. I mean, we're post 1844. We're in the time of the cleansing of the sanctuary, but it still comes out of that same kind of era. And so in 1848, the message to our people was no tobacco, tea, and coffee. Our people rebelled, and they fought Ellen White on this topic, and saying that she was crazy, because many of our people did not want to give these things up, and they actually left the movement and they chose to walk with God's people no more. Very sad history. Just like what happened with Israel when they, during the Exodus, they wanted their meat and they went back to Egypt so they could have their meat again, and they chose to walk back away from God's people and did not walk with them anymore. So from this message of 1848, they rebelled so much that it took now until 1854, 6 more years later. 6 years it took for those 3 items for God's people to finally see and to solidify that, yes, these things need to be removed from our diet. 6 years, because then the next one came in 1854 about adultery, that our bodies are to be clean. Control of our appetite is needed. The use of profanity, and that parents are neglecting their children spiritually and not raising them properly. It took 6 years for God to reach the hearts and minds of his people. 6 years. And then from 1854, another 6 years. In 1860, it took then, or from 1863, 9 years. It now took 9 more years just for these simple truths to be understood by God's people. See, he did not move ahead until his people were ready. And it took 6 years the first time and 9 years the second time for these very simple principles. And now then the fourth vision then was given in 1865. So that was now 2 years later. And you can see that God, he, just like in the Dark Ages, he brought one truth after another, but only when the world had an opportunity to know that. And here we are 150 years later, and we're still complaining about the health message. We're still complaining that we want to eat our clean meat, that we want to eat our fake cheese and our fake meat and all this processed foods and all the sugar. And we're still fighting it. But there's going to be a time. You see the love of God here? 150 years that he has been giving us to understand this message. But the time of probation is going to close very soon. When is that? I don't know. But we can see from the events of the world that it's not going to be too far off. And yet, God's people are still missing the timeline. We're not understanding our responsibility and where God's trying to bring us. And yet we're still fighting health reformers who are trying to warn the people. Oh, those health reformers. So we got to be loving and kind, because we've not really done a good service for the service of God in this area. I want to also take us to a principle of the physical and the spiritual. So in 1 Corinthians 15, 44 to 49, open up your Bible if you have it. So 1 Corinthians 15, 44 to 49. We're going to kind of go through this carefully. Because I want you to understand also this principle. And this principle is the physical and the spiritual. Okay, so follow along with me in your Bibles, and I'm going to insert one of two names so you can clearly understand, because we're still talking about the big picture of the health message here. You know, is it important? Is it a part of the Bible? And we've seen every talk that yes, it is. All right, so let's go to 1 Corinthians 15:44 to 49. I'm going to insert the name either Jesus or Adam to make it more clear of what's happening here. Okay, it is sown a natural body, Adam. It is raised a spiritual body, Jesus. If there's a natural body, Adam, there is also a spiritual body, Jesus. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, Jesus, but the natural, Adam. And after that, the spiritual, Jesus. So Adam came first, and then Jesus. The first man, Adam, was of the dust of the earth. The second man, Jesus, is of heaven. As was the earthly man, Adam, so are those who are of the earth. And as is the heavenly man, Jesus, so also are those who are of heaven. And just as we have been born the image of the earthly man, Adam, so shall we bear the image of the heavenly man, Jesus. Okay, so what does all this mean, and what's this have to do with the health message? What we can see, I'll bring this over to you as well. What we see is that the Old Testament is more literal, local, and physical, and the New Testament is more spiritual and worldwide. And Jesus was that dividing point between the two economies, between the Old and the New Testament. So let's give examples of this, because we're still looking at the big picture here of the health message and health reform, and where does it fit in? We see that it fits in everywhere. So in the Old Testament, we have physical Adam, and in the New Testament, we have spiritual Jesus. In the Old Testament, we have the physical tables of stone, where in the New Testament, we have the spiritual tables of flesh. In the Old Testament, we have physical Israel, and in the New Testament, we have spiritual Israel. In the Old Testament, we have physical circumcision, and in the New Testament, we have the circumcision of the heart spiritually. We see in the Old Testament, we have a physical temple, versus the New Testament, we have a spiritual body temple. We see in the Old Testament, we had physical animal sacrifices of death, where versus today, our bodies are a living sacrifice spiritually. In the Old Testament, we have priests physically entering the sanctuary, where now we can enter spiritually, or physically, in the Old Testament, they entered physically into the sanctuary, but now we enter into the sanctuary spiritually through that veil that was rent by those invisible hands at Jesus' death ourselves. We don't have to now go through a priest. We see in the Old Testament that we die physically, but in the New Testament, we now die spiritually to Jesus daily. In the Old Testament, we see that we have physical manna that rained down from heaven, but today we see in the New Testament, Jesus is our living bread. He's our manna spiritually. In the Old Testament, we are physically born, but in the New Testament, we are born again and born from above. In the Old Testament, we physically marry a spouse, where in the New Testament, we are spiritually married to Jesus. The church is his spouse. we are married to Christ. Now we can take this right to the health message. We see that Jesus physically healed supernaturally during his ministry, versus now in the New Testament, that now keep in mind, he's that dividing point, that we now have spiritual healing through the health message. And that halfway through Paul's ministry, we don't read anything more about the miraculous healing. Instead, we read that he is giving Timothy to a natural remedy of taking a little wine or grape juice for his stomach ailment. And that's in 1 Timothy 5:23. So we see that even the physical and the spiritual in the Old Testament and the New Testament, it just marches right along. We cannot divide the health message out of anything. It is in so many different places linked in with the Bible, but we just haven't been taught it that way. We haven't kind of learned at it, in those ways, and we haven't studied it in those ways. But yet we can go right back to the Garden of Eden, and we can see that those who break the laws of God will become blinded in their minds and break the law of God. In Counsels to the Church 105.1. We see that the health message is spiritual in nature. I'm eating the way I'm eating. God calls it a remedy. And if I want to be healed, I now, in the New Testament, have to abide by the health message. That's the miraculous event that happens. People are being cured of cancer and heart disease and diabetes and obesity and liver disease and all sorts of things through the health message. It's amazing how this has happened, and now this is God's ordained way of healing us. Because if Jesus were to just heal us like he did in the Old Testament, well, we see that many times that did not create a changed person. We can see that with the 10 lepers. It didn't change 9 of them, that miraculous healing. 9 just went away and never came back. 1 did. 1 appreciated spiritually what happened, but the 9 did not. And so that goes for today as well, that if God were to just, in the snap of a finger, heal somebody, they would just go back to their old lifestyle. They'd be eating the same, they'd be doing the same thing. And see, spiritually, it's not bringing us back to the Garden of Eden. It's basically just taking us back to the Old Testament, which takes us eventually back to the Garden of Eden again. So the health message is a spiritual battle for each one of us. It's a spiritual battle. Spiritual things are spiritually discerned. And if we're still looking for those miracles of someone bopping you on the forehead and you fall down and then you're going to wake up or come back up healed, we need to really take a second look to see, is this really God? And our counsel shows that most of the time this is actually not God. He's not going to do this kind of display in front of all these people, and all of these televangelists are all, look at me, look at what I've done. God's people, God's true people says, look at God, look at what he's done. And we don't look at ourselves. So we see that we miss the mark when it comes to salvation because we're looking at the world through physical eyes. God is trying to help us to understand and to see with not our physical eyes, but with our spiritual eyes. He wants us to understand not with our own, physical understanding, but God's intervention spiritually of what he does in our mind and in our heart. And he wants us to hear, not with our physical ears, but with our spiritual ears. Revelation says, to him who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit has to say. He's teaching us a new way to think. If a man looks lustfully at a woman, he's committed adultery. If we hate our brother, we have committed murder. You see, he's after the way we think. And this is of a spiritual nature. This is not any more of a physical nature like it was in the Old Testament. This is a whole new way of looking at life. Salvation has always been the same from Genesis to Revelation. It's always been a free gift. It's just that they were looking forward at the cross of how to be saved through the sanctuary message. We look back at the sanctuary message of how to be saved. But Jesus is that dividing point between the two economies, and we have to understand the difference now between the Old Testament physical and the New Testament spiritual. Big difference. That's why we have the health message. It is of a spiritual nature, and this is God's ordained way. So what does health reform then have to do with you and with me? First of all, we read in Counsels on Diet and Foods on page 460.5 that it is to be progressive, that we are to put our, like Moses, he put his toe in the water, the Red Sea parted. We too are to put our toe in the water, signifying that, yes, I'm standing on the red carpet. I want to be shown the way to heaven. This is of a spiritual nature now. It's no longer the physical sacrifices. Now it's a spiritual sacrifice of ourselves today. This is a bigger and broader message than we have really an understanding of. And we see from Genesis to Revelation that there's progression of truth, just like there was a progression of truth coming out of the Dark Ages, and how even Adventism, it comes out of the Dark Ages when we look at it at the long term, even though we're post-1844. And we can see that the health message is also progressive. God didn't give that third vision, which was quite a comprehensive vision, the first time. The first one was no coffee, tea, or tobacco. No, it wasn't even alcohol. It wasn't even unclean meat. You know that a married couple, actually came to Ellen White and told her, "Do you know that we're not supposed to be eating unclean meats like pigs?" You know what Ellen White told them? Don't be extreme. She said, don't be extreme. If God has taught that to you, then you obey. But that's not where God is taking us right now as of today. God has not taken us there. He eventually did in 1863, but prior to that, God did not. That was called extreme. But yet now we have the Nebuchadnezzar diet, if you remember what I showed up on the screen. And yet that is not extreme because of the days in which we live now. That's why it was extreme back then to give up pork, but it's not today. It's because this progression, because God is trying to bring us to the heavenly Canaan, and we need to be taming our taste buds to that location. And our test is going to be when we are run from our homes and we go to the forest. That's going to be our real test. It's not when we get to heaven. It's when we have to run. And then God provides food for us. He's going to provide his manna, whatever that looks like to us. And if we aren't happy with that manna, we're going to be heading right back to Egypt. And we are going to choose to not walk with God's people anymore. The parallels are just like all over the place. That, how can we say as a people that there's no salvational message in the health message? It's just like splattered all over the place. But we're just not used to seeing it this way. And so that's why I am sharing it the way that I am. And I'm not bringing in research. And I'm not bringing in the physical benefits of the health message, because we already have a number of wonderful people already teaching that. We just need to know more about why is this important spiritually. So I just kind of am bringing it to more of a broader understanding. And then we're also told that another of God's physicians is cheerfulness and a clear conscience. There's not just 8 laws of health. There's many more. So we have another one, cheerfulness and clear conscience. And dress reform is also part of it. And we're told that cheerfulness and a clear conscience are better than drugs. and will be an effective agent in your restoration to health. And yet, we want to give people herbs and we want to do all these things. The first foundation for God is diet. It's full health reform, the full message. As I've given from Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, I've been talking about the recipe almost every single talk. Whole fresh fruits and vegetables, raw. Beans and legumes, nuts, seeds. Nuts and seeds should be as much as possible in the raw state, not with oil, not roasted, no salt. And I understand they're a little more tough to get, but many times if we can band together, we can often, get a larger supply, maybe from a neighboring country, or somebody is coming from Uganda and something is there and they can say, hey, bring me something like this and something that's here. And, you kind of do trades like that. And because that's what we do in the US and Canada when we can't get things back and forth. So we're told that there is a sin in intemperate eating. And Christian Temperance Bible Hygiene 155.3, the sin of intemperate eating. Eating too frequently, too much, and of rich, unwholesome food destroys the healthy action of the digestive organs, affects the brain, and perverts the judgment, preventing rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting. And yet, so many times we just treat our body like we can just eat whatever we want, whenever we want, and without any regard to the intensity of digestion in our body. It's a very grueling process. This is not just some easy process. It's so hard that our body cannot, it takes up so much energy and reserve to digest our food that we cannot detox and heal and digest at the same time. We either detox and heal, or we, healing happens much slower when we're eating, and it happens much faster when we're fasting. And then the healthier food that we do eat, that's easier to digest, it makes healing even easier. So we are told that again and again, I've been shown that God is trying to lead us back step by step. This is not an all or a none. This is not tomorrow morning you're going to wake up and you're going to be perfectly, 100% in compliance with health reform, because, you need time to take this home, study it, mull it over, be like the Bereans. Is what Dr. Janie says, is this true? And, allow God to convict you and show you and mold you and give you time to walk through this process. Get up a support group together. Get up a study group together. So you can study, whether it is on a WhatsApp group, or whether it's you get together every night in person or on Zoom and you study from your homes, or however you want to do it, every Sabbath afternoon, however. But I do recommend you go home and actually take this to your church in a very gentle, loving, kind, non-judgmental way, allowing people to be where they are. I'm a broken record on that, because I have to be, because we're not always so kind to each other. So we are told that man should subsist upon the natural products of the earth. Natural products. Those are things that we can grab from a tree or from a garden. We are told to discard all unwholesome recipes. That means everything. Willing ignorance on this subject is sin. Each one should feel a personal obligation to carry out the laws of healthful living. 3 SM 291.2. God requires continual advancement. It is not just because I've given up my animal products that I've arrived. So that might be where I'm at right now, but there is another step. And maybe some of the things that you've been learning here is the next step. And maybe, you've been hearing lots of next steps. But eventually God's people will get to all these steps. And it doesn't happen overnight. God requires continual advancement. They need to learn that indulged appetite is the greatest hindrance to mental improvement and soul sanctification. And the Spirit of God cannot come to our help and assist us in Christian character while we are indulging our appetite to the injury of health and while the pride of life controls. That comes from the Health Reformer, September 1871. So why is health reform important in these last days? Then it's because it is to secure the highest development of our body, mind, and soul. That's from Ministry of Healing 146, and in 6 TC 372, 1900, the habits of our eating and drinking show whether we are of the world or among the number whom the Lord by his mighty cleaver of truth has separated from the world. Eat of this, and you belong to me, and you'll live forever. Eat of this, and you will surely die, and you will show that you don't belong to me. And we lost salvation. It's as simple as that. There is no other simpler principle. God says, if you love me, keep my commandments. I command your diet. And if you don't want to follow me and you want to try the world on your own, go eat of this tree. And that's where we are today. But he's got that mighty cleaver of truth. We are told that Jesus' victory is an assurance that we too may come off victors in our conflict with the enemy. But it is not our Heavenly Father's purpose to save us without an effort on our part. And we must cooperate with Christ. We must act our part, the divine power uniting with our power, with our effort, and the unity will bring victory. The medical work has been presented as the right hand of the body of truth. So it's the right hand. It's not the message. It's the right arm of the gospel. So let's leave it to the right arm. We are not to have it as a test of membership with people. We are not to have it as a dividing point. And for health reformers that are already on the road, it is our responsibility to make sure that there is no division. We are to lay our pride and our ego down into the dirt and stomp on it. And if somebody wants to argue, we need to just walk away. Let them have the last word. Our counsel is we are not to have this topic as a division. The gospel minister should preach the health principles, for these have been given of God as among the means needed to prepare a people perfect in character. Perfect in character, hello, red light, this is end time wording, this is 144,000 language, and I need to pay attention to what is God trying to show me. Not what is God trying to show you guys. What's he trying to show me? It's your duty to ask yourself the question, what is God trying to show you? Not everybody else. Not your spouse, not your mom and dad, your adult children, or some other persons. It's you. Therefore, health principles have been given to us, a people, that we might have the fullness of God's blessing. The light God has given on health reform is for our salvation and the salvation of the world. That means that this is a message that is to go out to the world. This is the right arm. This is how we get into people's homes. It's how we get into their hearts. It's how we can start conversations with them. Thank you for healing me when doctors have been trying to heal me for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And they've told me to go home and get my affairs in order. And in this short time, I'm already healed or on my path to healing through what you people are teaching. You see how that's the right arm? It's not the message, but it's the foundation. And then if we have a trouble with our appetite, then God's given us fasting even as an underlay of health reform, of the health reform message. So we've been given fasting as a tool. We've been given health reform as a tool in order to save people and save ourselves. So why is it important, again, in these last days? God desires his people to be light bearers to a world lying in midnight darkness. But if they refuse to go forward, with the light that he has caused to shine on their pathway, the light will finally become to them darkness. And instead of being light bearers to the world, they themselves will be lost in the blackness that surrounds them. God desires his light bearers ever to keep a high standard before them. By precept and example, they must hold this perfect standard high above Satan's false standard, which, if followed, would lead to misery, degradation, disease, and death for both body and soul. So what does he mean? It means that as God brings light to us, we are to obey. We are calling ourselves Christians. God's telling us our duty. We are to change to his ways. We conform to him because of the name that we have chosen to adopt, Christian. Christians follow Christ. And so following Christ means he's got a diet that we are to follow. And when he shines that light upon us and we reject it, we will now be left in darkness. That's what happened with the reformers. And as I showed how health reform came out, all of those other people who did not move forward with the truth, they remained in darkness because now God brought forth a new truth, and they rejected it. And that's just like the sanctuary message. So we start with the outer court. When Jesus walked on earth, he was in the outer court, and then he went into the inner court, and then the holy place, and then he went into the most holy place where he is now in 1844, and we know that prophecy. So this is something to really look at about. So what is your challenge and mine? God is telling us that he wants us to take Counsels to the Church 109.3. Our motto is to be death before dishonor, or the transgression of God's law. That should be the motto of every Christian. Death before dishonor. And if you haven't read Fox's Book of Martyrs yet, that's a book that Ellen White recommended that God's people read. I highly recommend it, because that book, you have to be spiritually ready for it, because it's pretty heavy reading, but that book shows what the 144,000 are like. It's an amazing book if you have the right mindset. Instead of looking at all the murdering and all the wrong that is being done, look at the faith of these people who are being set to the stake, and yet they are hugging and kissing and forgiving their fire starters. That's where God wants to take us. It's an amazing message. It's called Fox's Book of Martyrs. Fox is he's the author. That's his last name. I don't remember what his first name is, but Fox, like a fox that runs around in the forest. So it's Fox's Book of Martyrs. So it goes through the Reformation of what I had talked about all of the death, the needless death that happened. But it was all for a reason. It was for a purpose. This book is just amazing. I can't recommend it enough. But I think I had to be spiritually ready for it too. Because when I read it, I was asking God at a time in my life, what does the 144,000 look like? Like, what am I trying to attain here? You know, you're told that, you tell us that we're to strive to be part of the 144,000, but like, what does it look like? What do these people look like? And that's what they look like. I mean, just perfect trust. And they went to the fire willingly and without crying, and even though they might be leaving young children or a wife or a husband, or it's just like, if you just focus on their faith, it's an amazing book. So we are told also to take one's life instantly is no greater sin in the sight of heaven than to destroy it gradually but surely, and I add, through a poor diet. We went over this topic on the first day of is our health reform a salvational message or not, and we see that this is against the 10 Commandments. So Isaiah 41:10-13, fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee, yea, I will uphold thee with thy right hand of my righteousness. For I, the Lord thy God, will hold thy right hand, saying unto thee, fear not, I will help thee. This is our promise from God. This is a love letter to you and to me. It's to the world. This isn't God trying to figure out ways, to condemn us. He's always trying to find ways to save us. And yet, we still look at the forbidden tree and we still have a tendency to look at the negative. Oh, God, I still want to eat the forbidden tree and I still want you to save me. That's presumption, is that we are doing what we know is wrong, but yet expecting that God is still going to save us. That's presumption. God is not going to save us if we know what we are doing is wrong. So I see that He will help us. So what is our duty? And will you stand with God in all things, including your diet? In PH 128, we read, "The Lord has given clear light regarding the nature of the food that is to compose our diet. He has instructed us concerning the effect of unhealthful food upon the disposition and character. Shall we respond to the counsels and cautions given? Are we going to respond? Who among our brethren will sign a pledge to dispense with flesh meats, tea, coffee, and all injurious foods, and become health reformers in the truest sense of the term?" In the truest sense, not our own definition, because we all have a long ways to grow. None of us have arrived. I've been on this journey for almost 30 years. I'm someone who looks for the health message in the Bible. I'm someone who digs for it. I pray for it. I embrace it. I change. I love it. I teach it. And I still have not arrived after 30 years of that kind of intensity. And my guess is that no one here yet has arrived either. We all have a lot of growth yet to go. But we're not to compare ourselves to each other. Don't get overwhelmed. You don't have to be where I am, and I don't have to be where you are. We all just have to be on the red carpet. And that's what matters. And the thief on the cross shows us that principle, that he was only alive for 6 hours and he was saved. He wasn't all the way down at the end of the road, at the end of the red carpet. He was only 6 hours along on that red carpet and he was saved. And so every hour and every day and every year that God gives us of life, we have more responsibility than the thief on the cross. He couldn't do any more than what he did, but he still had perfect faith. And it's that perfect faith that saved him. Are there any comments or questions? Oh, are we still recording?
Personally, when I was in campus, I was a medical missionary, actually doing exactly what we have been taught. And once I got married, the system changed. So to me, I knew this is true. But because I'm not able to provide for those staffs, I had to work with what my husband could provide. And so I failed. I failed to an extent that when I was diagnosed with brucella and H. pylori and some other issues I think maybe I could be having, it's because of my disobedience. But now I've accepted. I left light, I started working on darkness. Will God forgive me?
Yes. And he does. Praise the Lord. Yeah. Yes.
When we read 1 Thessalonians 5:23, it says, "And the very God of peace sanctify you wholly, and I pray God your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless unto the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ." So God's purpose at the beginning, when I was starting to study this health reform message, it was based on the physical part of life. And I thought that when you adhere this message, you become healthier and healthier, and it is not anywhere connected to the spiritual life. But God's purpose is for the soul, the body, and the spirit. So when God gives us the energy to be healthier, then we can better understand the spiritual aspects.
Hmm. Yes, of the health message, health reform. Yes. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes, thank you.